Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. It's funny how life throws these curveballs and you find yourself grappling with big questions, right?
Absolutely.
And then boom, you come across someone like Jordan Peterson, and their ideas just seem to resonate with millions.
It's true. It's like he's tapped into something universal.
And that's what we're diving into today. We've got excerpts from Who is Jordan Peterson, the man behind the global phenomenon. And trust me, this isn't just another biography.
Not at all.
Yeah.
This is about going deeper, understanding why his message has become this global phenomena.
And why so many people are drawn to his ideas.
What I find fascinating is that Peterson himself doesn't see it that way. He's not trying to sell anything. It's more like he sees himself as holding up a mirror.
A mirror.
Yeah, reflecting this deep societal need, a real hunger for meaning, for responsibility. That's what comes through in the source material.
Okay, so let's unpack that mirror idea. Because Peterson's book, 12 Rules for Life, that's not exactly a walk in the park, right?
It's dense. It makes you think.
It's intense, and yet it's sold over 5 million copies.
Incredible, right?
And then you look at his online following, millions more. So clearly he struck a nerve, but the question is, why him? Why now?
Well, his background's a big part of it. I mean, this is a clinical psychologist we're talking about.
Right, so he's not just some armchair philosopher.
Exactly. He's coming at this with decades of experience listening to people, to their struggles,
So it's almost like he's taking that therapy couch
bringing it to the masses.
and bringing it to the public stage, making these big, often intimidating ideas about meaning and purpose relevant to everyone's daily life.
Precisely. And this is where the feeling of being overwhelmed comes in.
Mm-hmm.
Peterson argues that when life throws chaos your way, and let's face it, that's kind of a constant.
Life is chaos.
Having that internal compass,
Yeah.
that sense of purpose, can be the difference between weathering the storm
He's
and,
drowning in it.
yes, feeling completely lost.
Which, I mean, it makes sense, right? If you don't even know why you're bothering to get out of bed in the morning.
Right.
Those everyday challenges, those little annoyances, suddenly they become insurmountable.
Exactly. And that's a key insight from Peterson's work. Finding meaning, it's not some luxury, it's the bedrock of resilience.
Wow. Okay, but here's something that I find interesting. Peterson often gets labeled as like the man's man philosopher.
I've heard that too.
But what's interesting is our source material mentions that most of his graduate students were actually women. So this whole Peterson is just for men thing.
Yeah, it doesn't quite add up, does it?
It doesn't quite hold water, does it?
It's a really important point because
Yeah.
this assumption that he's only speaking to men, it completely overshadows the broader appeal of his message.
Yeah.
His work resonates across genders, even if
Even if it seems like.
certain groups are more vocal.
So if it's not just about gender, what is it about his message that really seems to connect with men?
Well, Peterson speaks directly to this confusion around masculinity today. There's this idea that if you're ambitious, if you're striving for competence, it somehow equals this desire yes,
Yeah.
to dominate, to oppress.
It's like we've forgotten that wanting to be good at something, to contribute,
Yeah.
that's actually a deeply human drive.
Exactly. And this ties into his concept of masculine order versus feminine chaos, which, to be clear,
And he is very clear about this in the source material.
yes, he's very clear that these are symbolic representations, not literal descriptions of men and women.
Okay, so break that down for me. Masculine order, feminine chaos, it sounds like something out of Greek mythology.
Think of it this way. Masculine order, it embodies structure, goal setting, that drive to create something stable in a world that feels very chaotic. It's that part of us that says, okay, let's build something that lasts.
Okay, I'm starting to see the symbolism here. So where does feminine chaos fit in?
Think of feminine chaos as the realm of emotions, creativity, the unknown. It's the force of nature, always changing, always surprising us.
So it's not really
That's a
about
if.
men are this and women are that. It's more about recognizing these forces within each of us.
Yes, exactly.
Regardless of gender. That's a pretty profound shift in perspective.
It is. And this leads us to another topic that's often misunderstood, the idea of patriarchy. Peterson challenges that. Well, the oversimplified notion of it.
Which is a bold move in today's climate, let's be honest.
It is, but he's not afraid of a challenge.
So if not patriarchy, then how does he explain the fact that historically men have held more positions of power?
He argues that while, yes, power imbalances exist, reducing everything to men oppressing women is far too simplistic. He points to the very real struggles that many men face today: higher rates of suicide, imprisonment, being victims of violent crime.
And these are facts, right? These aren't opinions. This is...
Exactly. He's dealing with reality. And he's not dismissing concerns about inequality, but he is suggesting that we need a more nuanced understanding of how power dynamics actually play out in the real world.
So it's like he's saying, hold on, if men are supposedly running the show, why are so many of them falling through the cracks?
Precisely. And it challenges us to look beyond those easy answers, those simplistic explanations, and engage with the complexity of these social structures that we've created.
Okay, so instead of defaulting to patriarchy, how does Peterson frame the way our society is structured?
He argues that Western society, and yes, it has its flaws,
Plenty of them.
is built more on competence than on oppression.
Yeah.
You succeed based on your skills, on your work ethic, not because of some...
Overarching male force.
Exactly. He uses the example of hiring a plumber. You hire a plumber because they're good at their job.
Not because they're a man.
Right, not because of some oppressive system dictating your choices.
You know, I love that analogy because it's so relatable. No one wants a leaky faucet.
That's true.
It doesn't matter what your political views are. It highlights that in so many areas of life, we choose competence.
Over ideology.
Over ideology every time.
And this is where things get even more interesting,
Yeah.
especially when we look at Peterson's views on, hierarchy.
Which brings us to the infamous lobster example.
Ah, yes. The lobsters.
Yeah. Okay, I'll admit, the first time I heard Peterson use this analogy, I was like, did he really just compare humans to lobsters?
It does sound a little out there.
But then the more I thought about it,
Right.
the more I realized, there might be something deeper there.
Absolutely.
So help us out here. What's the connection between these crustaceans and this idea of hierarchy?
It might seem strange, but it highlights something really crucial. These hierarchies that we see everywhere, they're not just some modern invention,
Right.
like a product of capitalism or something. They are deeply, deeply rooted in biology. Peterson points out that lobsters, these creatures that have been around for millions of years,
Way before us.
they have social hierarchies too. And guess what influences these hierarchies?
What?
Serotonin,
Yeah.
the same neurotransmitter that plays a huge role in human mood and behavior.
Wait, so even lobsters get a serotonin boost from being at the top. Who knew?
It's true.
But what does that tell us about humans, about the way we organize ourselves?
It suggests that this pattern of ranking, of some individuals having more status, more influence than others.
It's not just some social construct.
Exactly. It could be woven into the very fabric of who we are, going back millions of years.
Which, that really challenges that whole social constructionist view, right? This idea that if we could just dismantle all the structures, all the system,
Right, like we could just wipe the slate clean.
would achieve this perfect equality. It's like Peterson saying, hold on a second, it's not that simple.
Exactly. And he sees that view, that simplistic view, as not only a bit naive, but also potentially, dangerous, yeah. He argues that while hierarchies, yes, they can lead to inequality, they also serve important functions.
Okay, like what?
They bring order, they incentivize competence,
Right.
and let's be honest, they exist whether we formally acknowledge them or not.
That's true. Even in a group of friends,
Right.
there are these natural dynamics, right? Some people are just more assertive, more influential, but then where do we draw the line? When do those, natural hierarchies become harmful, and what's the alternative?
That's the million-dollar question, and Peterson doesn't necessarily offer easy answers.
Right.
But he does argue that trying to eliminate hierarchies entirely, it's like trying to flatten a mountain. You might move some dirt around, but the mountain's still there.
So we're stuck with mountains, so to speak. That feels a little... Well, yeah, a bit depressing. Is he saying there's no point in even trying to make things fairer, more equitable?
Not at all.
Ah.
He's saying we need to be realistic about the challenges, and that instead of eliminating hierarchies, all we're likely to do is
Shift them.
make them less transparent.
So instead of having a clear ladder to climb, it becomes this kind of, murk game
Yeah.
where the rules are always changing. And those in power,
They can rig the system,
they can rig the system to benefit themselves.
and that's where things get really dangerous.
Which actually, it kind of describes what we see playing out online, right?
Big time.
This constant jockeying for position, this fear of being canceled if you say or do the wrong thing.
Yes, even accidentally, you're right.
It's exhausting.
It is. And this ties into another important point that Peterson makes. While he's critical of certain aspects of modern society,
Right.
he also sees Western civilization as, well, uniquely positioned to actually address these challenges.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How so?
He argues that the very values that some people are trying to dismantle,
Like what?
free speech, open debate,
Hmm.
individual responsibility, those are the tools we need to navigate these complexities. We need to refine the systems, not tear them down entirely.
So less burn it all down, more let's figure out how to build a better house.
Exactly. Peterson believes in reform, in evolution, not revolution.
Interesting.
And he sees Western civilization, with all its flaws, as the best system we've got for having those difficult conversations, for making those necessary adjustments.
That's a really interesting perspective. And it brings us to another key question. What about the man himself? What about his personal life, his experiences, his values? Because those shape how he sees the world, right?
They do. And you know what struck me while reading this source material? He's so candid when he talks about his own struggles, his own journey.
He's human,
He doesn't present himself as some flawless example of his own philosophy.
which is refreshing.
For example, he talks about his marriage, how he met his wife when they were just kids, and how that relationship
Wow.
has shaped his view of love, of commitment.
Which, it's interesting because it kind of goes against that whole alpha lobster narrative, right?
Yeah.
He's not advocating for this hyper-competitive dog-eat-dog approach to relationships.
Not at all. He values commitment, loyalty, building a life with one person.
Even while acknowledging how challenging any long-term relationship can be.
Of course.
And then you have his experience as a father raising a son and a daughter in today's world, which, let's be real, feels like
Minefield.
a particularly daunting task. So what insights does he offer on that front?
Well, he talks about the importance of encouraging both his son to embrace fatherhood
Okay.
and his daughter to embrace motherhood,
Okay.
acknowledging that these roles are different,
Right.
but equally essential.
It's that grounding and personal experience, that willingness to grapple with these complexities.
It's really
That's what draws people to him, even if they don't agree with everything he says.
Absolutely.
He's not just preaching from on high. He's saying, look, I'm figuring this out too, just like you.
And that brings us to what we might call the rapid fire round, because Peterson's views on certain issues,
Oh boy, here we go.
gender identity, the hashtag #MeToo movement, climate change, these are the ones that really grab the headlines, the ones that spark the most debate.
Exactly. And it's in those discussions that the importance of critical thinking, of not just accepting any viewpoint at face value,
Right, on other topics.
becomes absolutely paramount. So buckle up, listeners, because here we go, Peterson Unfiltered. We're diving into some of his most controversial stances. But remember, our goal here isn't to tell you what to think.
It's about giving you the information, the different perspectives,
Exactly. We're equipping you to form your own informed opinions.
to think critically.
Yes. Okay, let's start with a topic that always seems to spark heated debate, Peterson's views on transgender issues. What are we getting into here?
This is definitely a lightning rod issue. And Peterson, well, he hasn't exactly shied away from expressing his concerns he's been critical of. He sees it as a rush to embrace certain gender-affirming treatments.
Especially for young people.
Yes, especially for young people.
And you know what I find interesting is he draws this parallel, and this is right there in the source material, between the current climate around gender identity and the feminist movement.
Interesting comparison.
Yeah, and he says he never would have predicted how things would unfold. He sees kind of a similar thing happening.
A similar kind of ideological
Capture.
capture, yeah,
Yeah.
where even questioning certain viewpoints, even with good intentions, can get you labeled as transphobic or bigoted.
Right, and that ties into his broader concerns about what he calls compelled speech, this idea that you must not only accept certain beliefs,
You have to express them publicly,
but express them publicly even if you have private reservations.
even if you have doubts.
Which, I mean, that just opens up a whole other can of worms, right? We're talking about free speech, academic freedom, even just the ability to have open and honest discussions.
About really complex issues.
Yes, and this is where I think Peterson's background as a clinician really adds another layer.
Right. Because he's not just talking about this in theory.
Exactly. He's worked with individuals who are grappling with identity, with mental health.
He's seen it firsthand.
So when he's speaking about this, he's not just speaking from some, I don't know, ivory tower.
He's coming from a place of experience.
It's like he's saying, look, I'm not dismissing anyone's experience, but we need to be cautious, thoughtful, especially when it comes to young people.
Especially with medical interventions.
Exactly, medical interventions, things that could have, long-term implications.
And that call for caution, it often gets misinterpreted,
It's hostility.
as hostility, which just fuels the polarization.
It's true. It's like people hear what they want to hear sometimes. Okay, let's move on to another topic that tends to get people fired up, the #MeToo movement.
Right.
Peterson acknowledges the good it's done, exposing abuse of power, but he also has some reservations. What are those reservations and how do they connect to, his broader worldview?
He's concerned about due process,
Yeah.
that we don't shift away from this idea of innocent until proven guilty,
Especially in cases of...
alleged sexual misconduct.
Right, so it's not that he doesn't believe victims
Not at
or
all.
that he doesn't support their right to be heard.
He does.
But he's also concerned about
Protecting the rights of the accused.
protecting the rights of the accused, ensuring that everything is fair.
That there's due process.
Which makes sense. I mean, two things can be true at the same time.
Sure.
We can support victims and
And uphold the law.
uphold the law. It's about finding that balance
Got nuance.
that Peterson advocates for. Okay, one last hot button issue before we wrap things up. Climate change. You can't have a conversation about, well, anyone these days without this topic coming up. So where does Peterson stand?
It's interesting because he doesn't deny climate change.
Okay.
He's not denying that it's happening. He's not denying human impact,
But
but he's skeptical
of what?
of the solutions, or at least what's being presented.
Hmm.
He's skeptical of some of the predictions, and he doesn't see things as black and white.
And this is where his experience working with the UN comes in, which is highlighted in the source material.
It does.
He studied ecological and economic data.
He's engaging with the science,
He's engaging with the science.
with the complexities.
Exactly. And that's why I think even if you don't agree with his stance, it's a valuable perspective.
It is.
He's not saying, don't worry about it.
He's saying, think.
Yes.
Think. Let's
Yeah.
be smart about this. Let's consider, I don't know, the unintended consequences.
Of different policies, different approaches.
Exactly.
Are we creating more problems than we're solving? It's a good question. It is. It's that think it through approach that I think makes him so interesting. He's not afraid to ask the tough questions, to challenge assumptions.
And, whether you agree with him or not,
Right.
that's something we can all learn from.
To think for ourselves,
Absolutely. To stand up for what we believe in.
even when it's hard.
To really engage, even when it's uncomfortable.
And on that note, to our listener who's been on this deep dive with us into the world of Jordan Peterson, we're going to leave you with this. If you were to define your own 12 rules for life, what would they be? Think about it. Write them down. See where the journey takes you. Until next time.